Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and I'm back with what I would call part 2 of my videos on Bommal. Now, last week I hinted that the patch notes where they had bug fixed his A2 would actually result in him having quite a significant buff. Now, since then I've seen some people say that this isn't actually a buff, that the A1 hit more damage and potentially nothing is going to change. And I've seen or heard some rumors that even Playroom themselves have said this wasn't a buff. Now this, I feel, is going to be another Geomancer incident where they've bug fixed something, but unintentionally, I would say, they have actually buffed this encounter, which was already very difficult. Now keep in mind, they did release some notes after I released the video last week, where they suggested that they would be reducing the stats for normal Doom Tower, and they would be reducing it for level 10 on hard. Now, for most people who aren't necessarily completing all the Doom Tower, that's great. That's really, really helpful. And most of this video is not going to be focused on that. This video is really going to focus on, can Crimson Helm still solo Bommal level 90 hard? It's going to be a bit of a math exercise, and it's going to be quite a long video, so stick with me. I will put chapters in for people who want to skip ahead to see different things. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at the example that Stu Gaming did with his YouTube channel. He was quite a predominant soloer, trying different champions, tried Black Knight, tried Templar, and it was really good for the community to have someone to do that. So I will link his video where I've compared all of these stats in the description below. So credit to him. And I have mirrored his build. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at what the boss was doing in that encounter. And then we're going to look at what he's now likely to be doing in the next encounter, and having a look at the numbers to see, is it actually a buff or a nerf? If you have been enjoying these videos, which are more math heavy, more science detailed, and actually break into the game data a little bit more, we'd really appreciate if you continue to like and subscribe our videos, as it really helps us producing the content for you every single week. So let's get into it. So just to remind us quickly what they changed. So in the patch notes in 4.8, they corrected a bug which was causing the magma flood ability to go on cooldown whenever a HP burn debuff was triggering. What this meant was the boss would really use the magma flood, so it meant you had less HP burns going out, and just the way that the rotations went meant that actually the bot, you were really under HP burn. The thing that most people don't realize, because it's not in the patch notes, but it is when you assess what they've changed in the code, is the effect of the 100% damage from HP burn. That would never apply if A2 was on cooldown at all. So essentially that's a significant amount of damage that potentially wasn't being accounted for. It's very much like if you think about Tormund's passive, who will put you into a freeze debuff, if like 20% chance if you apply a buff or turn meter. Now if his revive mechanic put that skill on cooldown, that freeze wouldn't happen in the way that Magma Flood was working before 4.8. Now it will work like the passive for Tormund works now, where it doesn't matter whether he's in freeze after proccing that passive or whether he hasn't procced the passive, the freeze effect still applies until you actually take him down. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to take a look at Stu Gaming's video. We're going to just watch a few, like maybe 20 to 30 seconds, and we're going to look at what the boss is doing in terms of his skill usage. I'm using Stu Gaming's because I personally didn't run this strategy, and I know that he did a lot of work to get it done. So we're just going to watch. Now what we want to do is we want to look at the middle skill, the A2, and we want to see how often the Bommal boss is using it. And you will notice just by watching the first 20 seconds of this, he rarely uses that ability. So I'll pause it there so you can see that the A2, even when it was available, the boss would prioritize the A3 because obviously he wants to put bombs out. So what I've done is I've mapped the first 8 rotations of Bommal in terms of him applying the dread bombs going off, so 8 times of those. And then I've compared them like for like. So this section is going to be quite math heavy. Use the chapters if you just want to skip ahead to the actual conclusions and what we discover. But I'm going to work through the process because I think it's important if this video goes out there that the community sees the methodology of testing so that they can sort of, you know, say, yes, it's true, no, it's true. I'm sure someone will come out and say that it's just math until it's in the game, you can't test it, which is a fair assessment to some extent. However, I think we know enough from watching that video and using the same build and the same model and the same multipliers to test it in what I think and what I expect to be the new rotation. So the first thing we want to look at is the Bommal skills here. I've mapped up to around about 174 ticks, which is about 8 rotations, I think it is. So we can see in terms of the number of times he's using A2, he uses it once right at the start because it's available, it's not off cooldown. And then he uses it again here. But after that, we see one more here, and then we don't get a single A2 for a long time. So we're only actually seeing in a full 8 rotations 3 A2s. Now, remember from the skills, A2 is what provides the HP burn. So if there's no A2 going out, there's no HP burn going out. Now, the difference in the current patch to what we're expecting in 4.8, or what I'm expecting in 4.8, is the boss will basically follow a very strict cycle because it's not going to go on cooldown like it was before. So in this cycle here, we're actually going to see it go A4, A3 like it currently does, and then A2. That's not changing. Then it's going to do A1. Then we're going to do an A3 because A3 is off cooldown, and it'll always prioritize A3 over A2. It's then going to go A2 into another A3 because we've got an extra turn. It's then going to go A1 because the other 2 are on cooldown, and then it's going to do A2 again. And we're then going to see this pattern where essentially it falls into one round when it summons the dread bombs as A2, and then one round where it summons as A3. Now this rotation will happen throughout the entire fight. That is the fix that they have done, because the only way that A2 can go on cooldown is if he uses the ability, rather than before where HP burn would put it on cooldown. The other thing we need to note as well is because we're getting more A2s, we're going to get more HP burns, which means that there's more probability that a HP burn would be active at the same time as a bomb is active. Now in terms of what Crimson Helm is going to do, so I watched Stu Game's video, as any good person should do, and I went through and I saw what he was doing with the skill rotation. So he basically said he starts with 3 A1s. Let's just filter it down here so we can see. He basically starts with 3 A1s, then he does A2 to put the block damage up before the dread bombs go off, and then he's going to do an A3 as optional. So he said you didn't need to do it. You can use it if you're going to die. It does a revive on death, which is nice. You need to manual it. However, he said you can easily do A1. So that was kind of his rotation. And obviously we'll go through what his Crimson Helm was built like. I've mirrored and built it there. But he's obviously put it in regen and immortal, so every turn is getting a heal, and that's essentially what's keeping her alive. So I've done exactly the same thing in the current predicted one. So basically I've changed Bommal's skills over, and I've gone the same pattern. So how was Crimson Helm built? So I've looked at the video and I've basically mirrored the stats here. So Steel Gaming had 72,262 HP and he had 3,492 defense. That translates into a 77% damage reduction. So what that actually means is a single HP burn should be doing around about 2,168. Now obviously the boss wasn't increasing that, but every bomb that is active while the HP burn is on will increase that. A side note on HP burn that I think people need to understand, it's a fixed percentage. So what that basically means is it will do 3% of your HP and it will ignore defense. There's no way you can actually mitigate the damage that the HP burn would do. If you add more HP, it's still going to do 3%. If you add more defense, it's still going to do the same 3% because it doesn't factor in damage reduction. So this is actually why you'll see as we go through the video, this is a huge change, because there's no way that you can make Crimson Helm tankier, for a better word, to the change that they have made. Finally then, we've got the regen and immortal set. So Steel Gaming had 2 of the masteries in the support tree for 5% healing and 10% when on low HP. So if it's on high HP, it should be around about 11,381 HP, and immortal should be 2,276. Finally, I've added a calculation here if below 40%. So if it's below 40% HP, you'll get a little bit more. Now, one thing I've heard some people say is that the A1 hit harder for Bommal anyway. I just want to clarify that the multipliers for the on-hit damage from Bommal are identical for every ability. They are 3 times his attack, and the bomb damage that he does is 1 times his attack. One thing to know about the Bommal encounter is he will give himself a 5-turn increase attack. Now, unless you bring a block buffs, he will have increased attack up the entire fight. So I've actually calculated it based off using the stages tool. So if we want to know what the attack number is that we need to calculate, then we can go into the raid stages tool on the Hellhades website, and we can look at stage 90 hard. So we know his attack is 14,947, and we're going to need to multiply that by 1.5 to account for the increased attack. So what that roughly translates to is an ability of 53,808 raw damage. Now this is reduced by 20% because Crimson Helm is a strong affinity to Bommal, so it doesn't matter whether it weak hits or not. Obviously the weak hit would do significantly less damage. However, if it was a standard hit, that would be 20% less than a neutral affinity. Crimson Helm obviously is strong affinity, so there will be a chance for her to weak hit when she receives damage from the boss. Now it's very difficult to assess over sort of an 8 rotation how many weak hits we're going to get. So what I've actually done is I've made a few assumptions which I think balance out that issue. So the first thing I've done is I've said every damage hit that Crimson Helm gets is minus 20%. I've also then assumed that Bommal will never crit with his attacks. He could crit 15% of the time. And I'm also assuming that he always hits the minus 10% range. So those two combined would be almost impossible over a lengthy fight. He's more likely to hit higher ranges or middle ranges. What this basically means is I'm countering the issue of not including weak hits by essentially predicting the lowest possible damage output that Bommal can do on Crimson Helm. The numbers that I'm quoting in the assessment at 4.8 is the lowest, not the highest or the median or the average. It is the best possible scenario for Crimson Helm. Now, one thing I wanted to just double check was, is the calculations that I made based on Stu Gaming's build matching the damage that we're seeing in the game? So, as most people know who've seen these videos before, you can map out the damage based on knowing the multipliers, your damage reduction, and then all the known variables into a 10% range. And what we would look for is the number that actually gets displayed in game, is it on this range? So I've pulled out a screenshot of every single one of the abilities, the A1 through the A3, and we're going to see if it matches, just to verify that the damage that the Bommal is doing to the current Crimson Helm in the current model and the current build that I'm basing all this off is correct. So this is the A1 hitting Stu Gaming's Crimson Helm, and as you can see there's 2 damage procs. The first one is 13,000, the second one is 2,168. Obviously the second one being HP burn. So A1 we're looking to see is 13,031 on the range, and we can see here that it is on the 4% range, which is rounded up or down. This could just be a mismatch in the sense that the in-game defense is 0.4, which means it's rounded down rather than it being just at the fixed value that I've got. So that's good. That tells us, yes, that's a 3 times multiplier. The math that I've put into the document here is accurate. So let's just check the A2 here, Magma Flood, and we can see 1,000 or 11,904. Is that on the range? Yes, perfect. So that confirms that Bommal's A2 hits exactly the same in terms of damage as the A1. And finally the A3, just to clarify all 3 skills, this one is a 12, 6, 5, 5, 5, and again that is 1% mark. So we can see the system is working as we expect. We're on the ranges, the numbers are there. So what does that mean in terms of damage? Well, we know the old skill rotation based on just watching the video, and we know the fix that they have done will set a predetermined skill rotation, which isn't happening at the moment. So let's map this into damage. So this might scare a few people, but I'm going to run through the spreadsheet here and explain how it's all calculated. On the left, we've basically got who is taking a turn. We don't actually need to worry about the dread bombs at all in this rotation because block damage will ignore the damage the dread bombs do. So I've not factored them in at all. We've got the skills that the Bommal boss is doing, and then also the skill that Crimson Helm is doing. Now, I've got the skill that it doesn't particularly matter except for the block damage. So what we've got here is a column tracking when block damage is active. So that means if a bomb explodes, we don't take the damage. So in this example here, at this turn, essentially Bommal would force a bomb to explode and he would hit damage. So we should be losing the combination of the bomb damage plus that, but in fact we lose nothing. So we factored in the block damage. Then we've got the bombs going off, and again, I'm assuming that we've only placed one bomb here. Now there's a chance you could get two bombs if he strips the block damage buff. If he doesn't re-kit and he strips that, you're going to get two bombs, right? So there's a risk of that happening. So in this example here, I've predicted damage as if you're only ever getting one. So it's a conservative assessment. And we're tracking this as it goes. When you see boom, it means a bomb is going off, either through him forcing it to go off with an A1, which is what the A1 for Bommal does. It will reduce the bomb timer by 1, or by the bomb timer just ticking down from you taking turns. The other thing we've then done is gone when he does an A2, we need to apply a HP burn. Now I've put it one later than when the A2 happens, just for the math assessment, because effectively the HP burn goes as you start the turn rather than before. So what we'll do is we'll track this down. If an A1 happens, then it also reduces the cooldown, so which we see here. So Crimson Helm takes a turn. It's 3 turns when she starts that turn. It becomes 2 turns. Bommal will then force that 2 turn to become a 1 turn, so he takes another proc, and then Crimson Helm will take another turn, so that becomes the final proc. And then finally, we have mapped out the hit that the boss is going to do. And again, this is the minus 10%, so this is the lowest the boss could hit you for, unless you picked defensive masteries or increased your damage reduction in some way. So obviously if you added increased defense, then it would reduce this, but then you're probably going to trade it back in bomb damage and die anyway. And finally then, I've calculated the burn damage. Now what you'll notice here in the this chart you're seeing here is the current version that was in Stu Gaming's video. None of these ever go higher than 2168 because the passive is not active when A2 is on cooldown. That has been fixed. So on the final column here, we've got the health tracker. So how much health we start with is obviously 72262. And this will track how the health is being managed as you take damage. And on the right hand side here, we've got the expected damage you're going to lose per turn when this happens. So we can see here, sometimes it's just the on hit damage. Sometimes there's a bomb with a HP burn. This is probably the highest you can see that's getting taken here. Sometimes it's just the HP burn. But what you will notice is Crimson Helm doesn't really suffer. Now, obviously in Stu Game's video, he dies a couple of times. He gets low on HP, needs to rely on revive and death. That's the difference of having more bombs and also getting hit with a higher range in the Bommal on hit damage. This is the hardest hit that I found here. And again, we run to basically around here, which is 8 rotations. But you can see at no point, if we were running this math, and I've mirrored this math for the 4.8 patch, are we ever at risk of dying. So what happens in 4.8? So we have exactly the same structure here. So we've got the turns going, the skills being used, where the block damage is active, bombs being placed, HP buffs being active, and then the on-hit damage. Now, the first thing to notice, straight away, we're taking double damage from HP burn on the first rotation. So this is already higher. And you're also noticing a lot more HP burns are going out. And the other thing you should notice straight away, there is red on this side. And that is because we are now taking substantially more damage. If we compare the first 6 rows, we're on about 64,000 overall damage, compared to last time, which is 62,000. That's the impact of the bomb passive. Now if we go down to just row 43, by this point, we've taken 156,000 damage in the fight. Now, obviously, regen is going to be factoring in here. If I apply the same section, we were at 43. In the current way that Stu Gaming had it, would have taken 96,000 damage. So that's gone from 156,000 to 96. That's almost 60,000 more damage we are now taking. That is as a result of more HP burns. The effect of the HP burn being active whilst there are bombs out. This basically confirms what I alluded to in the previous video, that it might kill the majority of solo 90 hard strategies, because we have gone from very minimal amounts of HP burn. You know, we've only got 9 procs of HP burn in the first video that I watched up to around, I think it was after 8 rotations. Well, basically that adds up to about 19,000 damage. Already, by the first rotation, we're getting more HP burn damage than we did in the entirety of that 8 rotation on the last fight. So I'm going to summarize this now in a way that, if you haven't watched all this video, for everyone joining at this point in the bookmark, this is what this basically means in summary. So we are back on the first tab. What it basically means, in the current iteration that was recorded by Stu Gaming, Bommal did 15 A1s, 3 A2s, and 11 A3s in 8 Dread Bomb rotations. This now becomes 7 A1s, 11 A2s, and 11 A3s. So half of the A1s have now become A2s, essentially. In terms of how that translates to damage, well, the on-hit damage doesn't change, because effectively you get hit the same amount regardless of which skill they use. So that is the same at 327,000 over 8 rotations. The bomb damage doesn't change because he's still doing the same number of A3s. He was always doing that. That is a fixed value based on his attack. You can't mitigate it. It doesn't matter in terms of what defense number you have. It will ignore all that. So therefore that hasn't changed. That's 246,620 over 8 Bommal rotations. What has changed is the amount of burn damage and the value that that burn damage is going to do. In 8 Bommal rotations, that has gone from 19,511 to 88,882. So this basically means that an 8 rotation Dread Bomb fight, you need to essentially mitigate 662,566 incoming damage based on the same build that Stu Gaming had in his video versus 593,000, and that is basically an 11.69% increase of damage. For those who were almost alluding that this change is not a buff, it is a massive buff to Bommal for the strategies essentially that are not resist strategies. There's a big caveat there. If you run a typical, or I would say the strategy that Raid suggested or designed it for you to run, where you are running high resist, where you're running a block attack, where you're running block buffs, those strategies are unaffected by this change because you never take HP burn anyway. You don't take bombs. You're still taking the same on-hit damage. That doesn't change. If you are running a solo strategy, you are now having to face 11.69% more damage. So one thing I just wanted to quickly do as I was recording this video, I was thinking, well, can I actually make Crimson Helm still work? I've obviously compared like for like in this video, but can I make Crimson Helm survive? Well, let's just assume we go back to the build here and we say, okay, let's make her do 80,000 HP with the same defense. And we go back to the chart and we think, can she survive now? Oh, well, she's doing better. Oh, she died. Within the first 8 rotations, she still dies. And that's because of the burst damage. In this one rotation here, we got an A1 with a bomb and a HP burn. So all of that combined is just too much damage for her to tank against and regen back up quickly enough. So the thing with adding more HP is it just scales the damage more. We can see it here at the bottom. So if we revert back to what we had, we were taking 11.69% more damage. If I add an extra 80,000 HP, that just gives me more damage that I still have to take. Unfortunately, it doesn't change the on hit or the bomb damage. That's just fixed. It just means that the HP burn is going to do more damage. So let's assume I decide to increase my defense instead of my HP. So I'll put it to something like 4,000. Now that's going to help against the boss on hit damage, but it isn't actually going to change the damage difference. And you'll also notice that the actual damage has gone up. It's now 12.39% in terms of what you would have faced before if you had it at 4,000. Does adding 4,000 help me survive? No, I'm still dying around the same place. It's still happening the same way. And that's just because you can't tank HP burn. You're fixed on a linear path. You add more HP, you take more HP. You add more defense, it ignores defense. It doesn't really matter. So she still kind of dies, and you can't really bring resistance because we know Bommal has got an insane amount of accuracy. So if you're going to try and do that, you're going to need to bring a whole team with decreased accuracy, which then defeats the point of the solo strategy. So I think this is a big problem for solo strategies. I haven't tried and considered Samar Gem Cursed, nor have I considered any of the others. I know for a fact Burungiri was struggling even at 50 technically. That's probably going to die much quicker now. If anyone has any sort of ideas whether they think Samar Gem Cursed is going to be better, then feel free to leave it in the comments below. But certainly on the math that I've produced here, and we're, again, reminder, we're assuming the least possible damage. She doesn't survive. She doesn't make it. So I don't want to leave this on a negative note. However, it looks like, based on the math, certainly, I would suggest if anyone is relying on Crimson Helm at stage 50 or 90, that be prepared for potential problems there. This obviously doesn't affect stage 10. I would imagine all the solo strategies will still work at stage 10, especially if they reduce the stats, but they've been quite clear that they are not reducing the stats at 50 or 90 from what I understand from the messaging. You can of course come to the website. We've got a full guide and we have got other strategies you can use. I personally run the resist your way to the top type of strategy, where you actually have someone like Vizier or someone like Helm. Now the guaranteed Vizier event was great if people noticed it for Bommal. It gives you so much more flexibility because obviously if you place a debuff you get a bomb. Vizier removes that effect completely. So you can run a high resist comp using someone like Kantra, who can reduce the accuracy of the boss right down using Whirlim's decreased accuracy. Anax can do it. You've got other champions that also have decreased accuracy. Whirlim's the best because he brings freeze for the dread bombs. And you just want to try and heal yourself to the top. That's a valid strategy, but obviously you need to be able to gear it. It's much harder to do. Whether the solo strategy still works, who knows? Samar, we would need to see if the stats. I could run the stats against what I've done here, but I know it's a bit trickier with this passive. But if people want me to do that, just leave it in the comments below. I hope people aren't so depressed about it. I hope it's interesting. I would say the reason why I'm highlighting this is not to get people down, but to actually encourage Plarium to maybe consider adjusting some of these stats down for people. It depends really if they want people using the solo strat. For me, this seems like this will kill pretty much all, if not all, the solo strategies out there. And it is 100% a buff to Bommal, whether they intended it or not. And I have heard that they don't intend it to be a buff, that this is just a bug fix. They haven't changed it to be a buff. However, it is definitely going to be one. So as always, guys, if you've stuck with me this far, you are a true for sciencer. Thanks very much for watching. I'm sure this might be a bit of a hot topic, so if you have any questions about the math that I've produced here, or if you're not sure if something is accurate, please leave them in the comments below, and I will answer them when the video goes live. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more of these videos, please give the channel a subscribe. It's a brilliant way to help us continue making content for you and bringing the information to you before it hits you in the game and before you face these issues. But that's all for me, and I'll catch you in next week's video.